What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, August 15th here, middle of the month. My goodness, where's the time going? We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. A quick reminder, in our third hour today, we will be talking with Leon Siu, who's the foreign minister for the Kingdom of Hawaii. We're still waiting for a final confirmation. He's obviously very, very busy these days here, and we're going to try and get him on here, talking about restoration of the Kingdom of Hawaii, the sovereignty, in light of the fact that the U.S. government admits their acquisition of Hawaii was illegal under international law and treaties. And, of course, they're paying very close attention to the Cal-Exit movement, what's going on over in Catalonia. And we're seeing, in the wake of all this abuse by the globalist New World Order people, that, people are saying, I want to go back to having our own country with our own culture, our own history. Do you realize that if the globalists succeed in turning the entire planet into the same mishmash, blended society, tourism will drop. There won't be a reason for anybody to go anywhere else. You go someplace else, it looks just like what you got here. Fast food restaurants, franchise chains, shopping malls, that's it. Seen one, seen them all here. All right. This nonsense with the attack on the Confederacy, the memorials, the statues, is really getting out of control. And apparently over in Durham County, North Carolina, there was a rally that spontaneously turned into a tear down the statue, sort of a reminder of when they were tearing down Saddam Hussein's statue with that staged crowd over there in Iraq. And apparently they looped a rope around the statue, a bronze statue, and the statue's been there since 1924, and they just tore it down. And they were kicking it and spitting on it and posing for selfies with the torn down statue. And obviously not having had any kind of illegal justification, they're all guilty of vandalism of a public monument, and police are looking at criminal charges, which is going to be easy because they took all these selfies and posted them all over social media, so the police know exactly who to go get. And the protesters are claiming they were responding to the incidents in Virginia, and apparently the cops were intimidated and stood back and let it happen. But it was a criminal event. And it's not the only place. Apparently Gainesville, Confederate monuments vandalized in Atlanta, Georgia. Over in Baltimore, they've apparently decided they're going to just tear them all down. Going to tear them all down. Yeah, they're all going to be gone. Because the Confederacy was evil, and we are sweetness and light. Actually, not really. And this is why it's important to preserve history accurately. Because all of these people who are out there are proceeding on the basis of a false assumption. All over the country, we have these self-appointed history erasers, and they're tearing down Confederate monuments because they disagree with the Confederacy's slavery issue. But the Confederate States did not secede over slavery, nor did Lincoln fight the Civil War over slavery. Both the secession and the war were about excessive federal taxes and excessive federal overreach. And in that context, knowledgeable people, educated people, understand that Abraham Lincoln lied the Union into the Civil War. Slavery was just the excuse, because he wasn't going to get people to leave their homes and go off and get killed and crippled over this idea of bringing the southern states and their tax revenues back under the control of Washington, D.C. He lied the country into the war, the same way McKinley did, Lyndon Johnson did, Franklin Roosevelt did. Lincoln was just as bad as those people. But you don't see us going on out and trying to knock down the Lincoln Memorial, right? And there is the difference. We disagree with what some people in history have done. We don't go on out and tear down their monuments. The violence is totally unjustified. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. John, somewhere down south. Go ahead and tell me what's on your mind today. John, there you are. Okay, what's on your mind?
There we go. Yeah, about an hour ago, a young man with an AR-15 and a Confederate jacket and hat went to the Lee statue in Charlottesville and stood there and, like, saluted it for, like, a minute.
Yeah.
And he was surrounded by these leftist activists, and they just got all foul-mouthed and all this other stuff. And then the AP, I think, had the video of it, and it's on Twitter, but they escorted him to a police car, an SUV. They put him in the front seat. They put his AR-15 in the back seat, and the cop told the lady who was yelling at him, "I'm doing what you asked." And then she said, "You're just a coward, and you won't walk out of the park by yourself." And then the cop looked at her and said, "You just want another day like Saturday, don't you? You should be ashamed of yourself." He handled it very professionally. Now, I have been opposed to all these rallies because I don't see the point. If we know it's a leftist mayor, we know there's people opposed to the statue, a mayor in a town or something, I don't think these people should come from surrounding states and invade some city and have a public rally, because and the build up to this was like 6 weeks, so we all knew it was going to go violent. And now it's just getting really bad for any quote-unquote white patriotic person to make the arguments we've been making since Ron Paul, because we're all getting shouted down as racist.
Yeah, I mean, that really is the agenda right now, is to basically demonize everybody who supported Donald Trump, like we're some kind of villains or bad guy for not going along with the globalist liberal agenda. And by the way, a lot of those people who were at that rally, we figured out why none of them could really throw a decent punch. They were all hired to be there. Somebody found the ad in Craigslist for a company called Crowds on Demand. They're out of Los Angeles. They're a PR firm, and they specialize in manufacturing a crowd for newspaper photographs and for so forth. And they found this ad from Crowds on Demand asking for people to show up in this North Carolina area, and they were all being paid $25 per hour plus reimbursement for gas and parking and so forth and so on. So it's a rent-a-mob. These are not real Americans expressing their opinion about the Confederacy or the rest of it. They're hired actors pushing an agenda.
Well, and they're not natives to Charlottesville either. So there's hypocrisy on both sides. My point is we're still free in this country to elect people to local government that represent our values. And if our values stand with the Confederate statues or preserving history, then we're free to do that. If they don't, or we don't show up at the voting booth and we get drowned out by the SJWs, then the statues are going to come down. So replace that government and put the statues back up. We don't have to have all fisticuffs and all this violence, and now it's going to be nonstop 24/7 open gates bashing white people for no other reason than to say they're white or suspect they're white supremacists, when everybody, like you and I have talked about before, a meritocracy. That's all we want. Get all the hindrances out of the way that make it seem like other races are preferred over whites, because that's some of the objection, but let's just have a meritocracy.
100%. I'm a huge believer in meritocracy.
All right, Mike, you take care, my friend.
Thanks an awful lot. I'm going to share a story with you that actually happened when I was at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And I was hired by JPL right out of high school because of the science fair thing that I won. And I'm up there, and I was bouncing around from job to job to job in there, and there was a job that I wanted, and I almost didn't get it. Now, I was the best qualified person there, but they came on back and said, well, we're subject to affirmative action, and we need a minority hire. And I said, well, my last name's Rivero, and I can speak with a Spanish accent, and somewhere in the closet I got a sombrero, and they said, all right, we'll get you through on that one. But I almost lost out on that job opportunity because they wanted a quota-based system in there. And if you start hiring on the basis of quota, you're not going to get necessarily the best person to be doing that job. And I hated having to go through that kind of deception I wanted to get that job on the basis of my skill level, my IQ, my science background. I had already passed qualifications on running some of the computer systems that were at JPL. You had to have little extra tags on your little clippy thing to access certain stuff, and I'd passed all those certifications. And I almost lost that job because, we got to have a minority in here and bring them along. And so, it really is. They're trying to create a system. I mean, now they're talking about cognitive privilege, where there is something wrong with you if you were born with a high IQ. Well, I'm sorry. I had no more control over the IQ I was born with than I had over the color of my skin. And now they're actually out there saying that jobs should discriminate against high IQ people in order to level the playing field. And we already know there are actually some areas where this is already done. If you apply for a job on the police force of most cities, if you score too high on the IQ test, they're not going to hire you. Don't want you out there thinking. All righty, let's take a phone call. First of all, we got to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And then we're going to take a phone call from Patrick in Oregon. Aloha, welcome to the show. What is on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. How you doing today?
I'm doing okay, actually. Feeling pretty good.
Hey, great. I think we ought to take a metaphor baseball bat and start beating the Democrats and all their supporters with Robert Byrd, the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan. How can they be so? How can they? Trump has disavowed David Duke on numerous occasions, but none of these Democrats, nobody ever brings up Robert Byrd, Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan, who was one of the lead Democrats in their party. Nobody ever disavowed him. How come?
Well, most people don't remember that the Democratic Party actually emerged as a pro-slavery group, and after the Civil War was over, and there were still ambitions in the South to bring slavery back, and they organized politically. And that is absolutely the reality there. It was always the Republicans who were anti-slavery.
And the Democrats are a party of the Ku Klux Klan. We just need to start beating them over the head with the name Robert Byrd and get it out on all the right wing shows.
Well, I really want to stop using the terms right wing or left wing. I mean, personally, I'm a centrist. I'm sort of like trying to navigate the most optimal path for the entire nation through all of the shoals with which we are beset. Anyway, Patrick, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go and get back here to the news. Now, Mike Krieger.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Right.
You have a wonderful day.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And story out of Zero Hedge, Mike Krieger is out there sounding a warning we must all be paying attention to. Do not play into this divide and conquer game, because this is really what it's all about. Right now, the federal government is absolutely terrified that the American people are coming together in opposition to the war agenda, to the terrible handling of our economy, to the globalists, and they're trying to split us up and turn us against each other. And they're spending a huge amount of money to do it. We're talking literally $1 billion has been poured into this campaign to fan up race hatred in this country from all kinds of different sources. George Soros is among them. And we know the government likes to do this because they did exactly the same thing back in the 1960s during COINTELPRO. When the American people were coming together in opposition to the war in Vietnam, the FBI went on out and they deliberately tried to fan up divides in our society. Blacks against white, the students against the parents, men against women. Everybody against the anti-war movement, and they did all kinds of dirty tricks. There was the staged riot at Disneyland, there was the Black Panther coloring book, and anybody who dared speak out and say that this was wrong, their careers were destroyed. There was a very famous actress back then, Jean Seberg, very famous in Europe and the United States of America. She'd done an amazing performance of Joan of Arc. She was in Paint Your Wagon, which is the only movie that Clint Eastwood actually sang in. And I think the very first airport movie, she was in that as well. And she was an outspoken defender of civil rights, and the FBI destroyed her by having one of their assets, the gossip columnist at the Los Angeles Times, Joyce Haber, putting out a story that Jean Seberg had gotten knocked up by one of the Black Panthers. And yes, it was the 60s and free love and the summer of love and the autumn of gonorrhea. But for most Americans back then, interracial sex was still a tacky no-no, especially when you're married. And it basically ended her career, and she eventually committed suicide. And it turned out, of course, the story was a complete lie and a fiction. And the FBI did apologize in the same Los Angeles Times back on page 8,642, right underneath the obituaries. But that's how the government plays. They love to play dirty here. All right, let's take some more phone calls. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Yeah, some of your listeners still don't seem to get it. This is an oligarchy. Nothing's going to happen to Hillary Clinton. Nothing's going to happen to Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Donald Trump is the figurehead of populism, nationalism, populism, whatever you want to call it, versus globalism. That's why you see on RT when they show John McCain meeting with the nationalists in Ukraine and the jihadis in Syria. This is what it's about. It's always been about this. It's a battle between two groups. The globalists don't want to give up power and give it back to the people of the world.
Yes. Versus
the nationalist populists. And people keep saying, well, I wish the media would talk. The media is not going to change.
No.
It's not.
That's why we're
Even
here.
Fox News.
That's why we're here. I mean, if the corporate media was actually doing the job they're supposed to be doing, I would love to find something else to do. Be Claire's roadie for the rest of my life here, and so forth. But, as long as the corporate media is the lackey of the deep state and the oligarchs, the independent media is going to be here, and we're going to continue to gain our audience.
If Donald Trump didn't run and like Mother Teresa ran, they would come out and call her a hooker or something. Because it's not about Mother Teresa per se. It's about what she represents. And it's a threat to their power structure. And people really need to understand this, because I just keep hearing the same people saying, well, if the media comes out and why are they doing this, we're Democrats doing it, it's because they're sticking with this globalist system. They're all corrupt.
Yes.
That's what it comes down. They're all corrupt. Look at the Russian thing. Big lie. They all voted for the sanctions, except for two people. That tells you they're all corrupt.
Yes.
Game over.
Yes.
That's it, Mike.
Well, it's easy to understand. The moral and the immoral are mutually exclusive societies. Neither one tolerates the presence of the other. So once a government starts to go bad, it will go all the way bad. And those people who are trying to stand up and do the job properly, like a Cynthia McKinney or a Ron Paul or Donald Trump, they're going to be controlled, hamstrung, blocked, and eventually ejected. And that's what's getting ready to happen here. Now, the fury over Donald Trump, especially with regards to all of this Russian nonsense, is an indicator that the deep state is feeling very vulnerable right now. They're not secure in their position. They're feeling fragile and vulnerable. And we have to take advantage of that and find their weakest spot and just concentrate on cracking it open. Right now, their weakest spot is Hillary Clinton, because everybody in this country understands that the Clintons are dirty, and they can see how the government is just clearly working to protect them. And it isn't that the government is protecting the Clintons per se. They're protecting the big, ugly, dark secret behind the Clintons and the Bushes and the CIA, that the biggest drug smuggler in the country is the country, because that is a secret that will bring this government down.
And people need to realize there's no party. It's their party. That's why you got all these Black Lives Matter and Antifa. They don't have a color to themselves, because they're globalists. They believe in this ideology. It's a cult, and that's why you have white women screaming, kill white people. A white person screaming, kill white people, that means she's...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's Jim Jones again. Have some Kool-Aid. Dustin, we got to let you go and take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and we're going to go back to the telephones here. Tom in Indiana, aloha. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind today?
Aloha. I want to pick your brain because you're as old as I am. Gene Berry, Burke's Law. Remember that program?
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Sure.
Is that a lot like our president? The president didn't need the job, and he went around and he helped people.
Yeah, I remember that.
How I thought about that was when you talked about the police department. And also, I want to thank you for the song Lives in the Balance.
Yes.
I never heard that song. I looked it up. I watched the lyrics, and that ought to be a national anthem.
Yeah, it really ought to be, and I was aware of it because it was actually used as background music for an episode of the original Miami Vice in an episode called Stone's War. That was the one where they had G. Gordon Liddy in there.
I do recall the intro. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it is, and that's exactly, it was an absolutely fabulous song, and it tells the truth, which is why, of course, it doesn't get a lot of play on the nation's music radio stations.
Yeah, well, have everybody go out and see how Burke's Law turned out. Maybe our President Trump can win.
I don't know. I'm beginning to think that Trump has been effectively muzzled. I mean, he's obviously on TV now talking about Charlottesville, but he's definitely drunk the Kool-Aid with regard to the war agenda. And that was one of the major reasons I was supporting him, along with keeping Hillary out of the White House. So at this point, I'm very disappointed, and it's obvious the war agenda is moving forward, and at great peril to us all.
Well, I'll keep on listening, and every eBay thing I sell, I always put a little thing in there to listen to you. So hopefully there'll be a whole bunch of people watching you or listening to you.
Okay, good. Do me a favor and send me your eBay page. I want to see what you're selling, okay?
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye. We're going to switch over to Chance in West Virginia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I've been thinking, do you think it would be a good idea for people to boycott states that are pulling down these statues by not visiting, not vacationing there, or not even following their sports teams just to affect their economies?
Sure, why not? I mean, like I said earlier in the show, if all the monuments and historical markers are torn down, why bother traveling there? There's nothing to see anymore. They're tearing down their own unique identity that makes them attractive as a tourist destination.
Yeah, but like I said, there's things that people are so hooked on sports nowadays, like giving up on their sports teams located in these states by not watching them on the television or visiting them. Just stay away from them and really affect their economy. I think that might be somewhat of a solution.
Well, it certainly is going to allow you to express your displeasure with all of these people in a peaceful, nonviolent way, which is, again, we have to take the high ground here. They're out there tearing down monuments of the Confederacy. Those of us who understand that Lincoln lied us into the Civil War, we're not out there trying to vandalize his grave or tear down the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. Because we're civilized.
Exactly.
We are the civilized people.
And unfortunately, the opposition is not. And the sooner that people realize this, the better off they would be. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much as well. I mean, that is rather the amazing thing. And again, in the context that we now know those people were hired and paid $25 an hour to go on out there and act like total barbarians. You have to think, remember all the rioting that was going on after Trump won? Okay. How did that change public opinion toward the liberal snowflakes? It went downhill. These people who are out there vandalizing the statues and tearing down all this stuff, they're not going to win popular support for what they're doing. It's almost violence for the sake of violence, and again, an attempt to stir up a race war.
And it's not going to stop.
No, not until people like Soros run out of money.
Okay, Mike. Goodbye now.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are now empty here. And when you get into this whole, whites are all racist and white genocide, we got to make them. It's based on an illusion. More about that when we come back from these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And so we're talking about this attempt to fan up race hatred, race tension in our country, and we've been seeing it for years, going on back to Trayvon Martin and that whole situation, Baltimore riots, and now most recently this whole thing about, the Confederacy, we've got to erase that from history. And it really is manufactured. And a lot of it is, they're out there saying all whites are racist, which is a racist statement, by the way. And we have people in positions of influence in the media and education openly talking about white genocide, going down the same disastrous path as Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, did. But a lot of it's based on illusions and falsehood. You've got these Black Lives Matter out there and their hands-up statements saying, the police are just shooting black people all over the place. And that is actually not borne out by the statistics. If you actually bother to do the research, something corporate media never does, you will find out that the police are killing white people almost twice as often as black people. And very often for no reason at all. This idea that blacks are being unfairly targeted by the police is just flat-out race baiting. In fact, the police are so afraid of the negative publicity that they're holding back when dealing with black suspects. But because nobody kicks up a fuss when white people are gunned down in cold blood, it's still happening. By the way, we just put up another story about stinky badges at whatreallyhappened.com. Down in Texas, 20-year-old woman was stopped by the police. The police insisted that they found 0.02 grams of marijuana in her car and used it to justify a body cavity search that lasted for 11 minutes, during which they found absolutely nothing. 11 minutes. Probing and all that other stuff. It's been described as rape by cop, and it's resulted in a huge, huge civil litigation. And I hope the girl wins. And I think those cops ought to be made personally liable. Now then, getting on to another topic entirely. There's a lot of research going on regarding the issue of whether our elections are, in fact, honest, verifiable, or if there's something else entirely, an illusion. Like Stalin said, as long as people believe there's been an election, it doesn't matter what the results are. So over at shtfplan.com, they have another story about yet another group who's done yet another survey and discovered there are 3.5 million more registered voters in the United States than there are eligible voters. 3.5 million. And these are illegal immigrants, dead people, fabricated registrations. It's a joke. It is absolutely a joke. Our election system is a disgrace. It has no place in a democracy. And the problem is really out of control in places like California. So I wish Trump's committee, special commission on election integrity, would get going on a lot of this stuff. Now, we understand the corporate media will never, ever, ever report on anything that challenges the election system because they are part of the problem. Most people are very surprised to find out there is no official government facility for counting our national elections. It all goes through a company that keeps changing their name all the time, but they're sort of collectively known as Voters News Service. Voters News Service is a private company. It is owned by the TV network news departments and the Washington Post and the New York Times. And they count the elections and provide the results and the forecasts, and they have been caught in the past rigging the data. So they're part of the problem. They're never going to admit there's a problem with our election system because they are part of that problem. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a phone call. Philip in Virginia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I guess this dovetails this problem with the election system, also with the problem that we're seeing on the streets right now with all of the demonstrations. And it goes back to the whole Hillary thing as well, and all of the crimes of the deep state and the narcocracy. That one of the functions of government is the establishment of the justice, as they call it.
Yes.
Not only setting up the whole structure in the system, but carrying these crimes to trial and to prosecution. The execution of justice is one of the 5 functions of the government. And if they would do that, you would see Hillary in jail, or being charged. You would see these mobs that are rioting and the bird dogging and all of this stuff. What took place there in North Carolina last night with the mob pulling down the structure, and they need to. And that is, I am amazed, Michael, that you just reported about the fact that they had the Rent-A-Mob ad there. That's how how they're getting away with it and not being able to track these people down. These people are coming in from out of town.
No, the government doesn't want to track them down. They're serving the government's agenda of keeping the population under control. Because forget the 5 things we think government is supposed to be doing. What all governments do, what they're obsessed about day to day to day, is maintaining power and control over the population. And, if they're not doing a good job, if the economy is terrible, if they're pushing a war agenda, then they start thinking about how do we manipulate the people to do what we want. And that's what leads to Roosevelt goading the Japanese into the attack on Pearl Harbor and acting like it's a big shock, or McKinley blaming a Spanish mine for the USS Maine, or all of these lies. It's all about maintaining control over the people. And again, if you want a textbook study on what's going on today, go back to the records of COINTELPRO, because after that was exposed by some very courageous people, I might add, Congress was forced to hold hearings because all of a sudden the American people woke up and realized we have effectively a Gestapo operating in this country. And back in the 60s, we weren't all that far removed from World War II, where the word Gestapo still had a very negative connotation. Now today, it's kind of open and in your face where, we have to do this to run the country. If we don't keep lying to you and tricking you and turning you against each other, America will fall, and we can't have that. But that's exactly what's going on. And the government is going to basically prosecute their enemies under the flimsiest of pretexts. Look at what's going on with the Bundys. And their friends are going to be protected at all costs, such as the Clintons, the Bushes, and obviously the Central Intelligence Agency.
Well, it's just sickening to watch them weaponize legislation that you refer to all the time, the Patriot Act, and how they weaponize that against us, but when they violate it, nothing comes of it.
Oh, yeah. So look at George Soros. He is clearly in violation of the Patriot Act by, funding violence with the goal of altering our political agenda in this country, and that is defined as an act of terror by the USA Patriot Act.
As well as the Department of Justice, we know that they were shaking down the corporations and funneling these penalties to these groups.
Yes.
Along with George Soros.
Yes. It is totally
corrupt. So that
corrupt.
would be Eric Holder and Loretta Lynch.
Yes, absolutely. And again, follow it all the way back, and it connects to that narcocracy. Okay, Loretta Lynch was the U.S. Attorney for New York when HSBC was caught laundering drug money. She gave them a wrist slap deal. Former director of the FBI, James Comey, was on the board of directors of HSBC when that stuff was all going down. And so they get in to be head of the FBI and Attorney General of the United States, and all of a sudden you have Hillary Clinton coming on in with the Clinton Foundation and the rest of it. And again, they don't want Hillary prosecuted because that's going to unravel all the way back to that narcocracy. That is the dark, rotted heart of the entire U.S. government. That CIA drug running that's been going on at least back to Vietnam and probably earlier than that as well.
Yeah, I saw in the news the other day, one of the infamous players of that whole deal was Ken Starr. He popped up on a news report the other day. I forget what it was about. I don't know if you saw that, but yeah, these guys are sick.
He's one of the players. I mean, but when Reagan was president, his Attorney General, William French Smith, was the Attorney General who wrote the rules saying that the CIA did not have to report drug smuggling activity they encountered in the course of intelligence operations. And it was basically the CIA's license to smuggle, because there was no difference between other people's drug smuggling and the CIA's own drug smuggling. They didn't have to report it, and they had the juice to keep the DEA away. And when William French Smith wrote this license to smuggle, Ken Starr was his assistant. That's why they threw him in there when that whole Whitewater thing was starting to unravel, because that was all about the CIA's supply mission to the Nicaraguan Contras, which was funded by smuggling cocaine back into the U.S., all in and out of Arkansas under then Governor Bill Clinton. If you really look, you can see how it all ties together into this specter of government-sanctioned drug running. And they sell it to your kids, and according to Freeway Ricky Ross and Gary Webb, they were deliberately targeting the black communities for most of this. Same thing back in Vietnam when they were bringing the heroin in. The CIA said, well, we're going to sell it in the black neighborhoods. We'll just get the money from them. And, Mario Puzo, when he wrote The Godfather, he included a quote in there that made it into the movie, where the Corleones are discussing whether or not they want to get into drug running or not, because they thought it was a dirty business. And there's a line in there where, somebody says, well, this other family's running the opium, sell it in the black neighborhoods, let them lose their souls. And that really was a very prevalent attitude, that it was somehow okay to smuggle these drugs back into the United States of America as long as you dumped them on the minorities in the inner cities.
No, Michael, don't you know we're concerned about your well-being and your welfare?
Okay.
Oh, man, this is too much. Well, anyways, I'll leave you with this, the point of the call in the first place. The failure for the establishing of justice, interesting Hebrew scripture, it says, because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, that's why people are so quick to do wrong. So it is a type of a deterrent,
Well, it's supposed to be, but again, if you're working for the CIA, you can literally get away with murder, and it does lead to this culture of reckless disregard for human life. You can't be involved in smuggling heroin and cocaine into the country and selling it to young people without eventually developing an attitude that they just don't matter anymore. They're just a source of money, and you convince yourself that somehow in the greater picture, this is good for the nation, you're doing a patriotic duty, but no, you're not. You're basically just another drug smuggler wrapped in the American flag.
And that's so sad. Well, all you Bible beaters out there, remember that Romans 13 says that the function of the government, the reason why you pay taxes, is to punish wrongdoers. So you're not getting your money's worth, so to speak, are you?
Well, we're not getting our money's worth from this government on basically everything. Look at the deteriorated streets, the crumbling infrastructure, a horribly mismanaged economy, an educational system that doesn't really educate. What we need in this country right now badly is a cash for clunkers law for the government itself. We take our big, bloated, inefficient government over to the junkyard, we put it in the little masher machine and crunch it on down to this little coffee table, and then we all get a check for $15,000 to buy a new, smaller, more efficient government. That's what we need in this country.
That's a great bit you do right there. I like that.
Thank you.
Thanking. Thanks for reprising
Feel free to copy it.
Okay. All right, thanks.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, Mike wanted to point out two things. As this previous guy just said, Soros has been connected and receiving government funds. He's been an asset of the CIA all over the world with these color revolutions.
Yes.
So, that all that's connected. But the broader point I wanted to make was that in the 250 years or something like that of the existence of the United States of America, all these, the Confederacy only was there for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And everything else, all the other racism, crimes, and everything that's going on happened under the United States. Slavery, everything. Jim Crow, all that stuff in the South, the rollback of the occupation of the South and all that stuff. It's so if you're going to look at that, how can you exalt the United States when as you said, the only thing that really caused this war was secession itself. They could lump slavery in there to make it look a little better, but it was slavery. It was secession.
Yeah, it was the tax revenues. The Confederacy...
It was perfectly okay for 100 years before that.
Yeah, it was fine. Basically, the Confederacy were tired of Washington, D.C. Just taking huge amounts of tax money and giving nothing back. And in a lot of ways, there were a lot of parallels between the Confederacy's secession and the American Revolution. And by the way, as a little side note, in 1793, which is the year that Great Britain finally officially recognized the independence of the United States, there was slavery all over the country, in the North and the South, and most of those slaves were white.
Another thing is, Mike, that there's two things. There were black slaveholders in the South.
That's absolutely true. Absolutely true. And there were black soldiers in the Confederate Army. Peter, we got to take a break for commercials. I'm sorry to cut you off. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go back to the telephones. Terry in Wisconsin. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
The light bulb came on in your ads. You talk about that about three callers ago, and here's what I propose. I have some land in southern Wisconsin, and I propose using this land to take any and all statues and put them on display. I think I've got enough land to put quite a few of these statues, and make it it was a horse farm. Well, now it'll be a statue farm, and we'll have some kind of a admittance price or whatever, and then donate all that money to the veterans. There's lots of veterans organizations throughout the Midwest and the rest of the country.
Sounds like a good idea.
I was listening to that gentleman, and I thought to myself, boy, that would really maybe be a big help for people that don't want to see the statues destroyed.
Well, the problem is, unfortunately, the statues are being destroyed. I mean, if you look at the way the one in North Carolina, they just put a rope around it and pulled it down, breaking it at the base. I think the feet are still up there on the pedestal. So I don't know what condition they're going to be in. But again, the reality is this idea that a group of whiners operating on a complete misperception of history have some kind of a right to go around and tear down monuments and historical markers is ridiculous. You can always find, no matter what has happened in history, you're always going to find somebody who disagrees with it, who thinks this or that person's a bad thing. Look at the brouhaha they're making over Thomas Jefferson because he owned slaves, and they're talking about tearing his statues down now. This is the guy who authored the Constitution, the framework of our country, and now they want to erase him from history.
Acres, I don't think I could take that big monument.
Well, and again, it is very arrogant of modern-day Americans to be passing judgment on people in history based on our current standards, because people in history were operating under the realities of their time. slavery was legal in the United States. In fact, in the years leading up to the Civil War, it was a state issue. The federal government had nothing to say about it, and some states said we're going to end the slavery, and some didn't. And Lincoln seized that to basically launch the Civil War, even though the Civil War was really all about recapturing the Confederate states and bringing them back into the U.S. government's tax base. That's what it was really all about. Lincoln lied us into a war, just like Roosevelt did, just like Woodrow Wilson did. And but again, you're not going to see us try and tear down the Lincoln Memorial. That's a very uncivilized thing to be doing.
Yes. Well, like I said, you had that light bulb commercial, and my light bulb came on. I thought, what a great idea to save these things. Even if they're damaged, I mean, people probably still want to come and see what they got. But
well, you know, I
don't know where to go next.
The funny thing is, in Moscow, when the Soviet Union fell, they took all of those statues and put them in a park. Even they respect the history of failed governments. We'll be back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're going to go back to the phones here. Milton over in eastern Pennsylvania. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Michael and listeners? I had a question. With these cops that are standing down and allowing all this violence to go on, if we should go in a type of civil unrest, can we trust these cops? Or are they our enemies?
Well, again, the fact that the police are being ordered to stand down, and we know that the order came from the mayor in the case of Charlottesville, then obviously these are staged events to push an agenda of fanning up race hatred in this country, to turn us against each other so that we will not unite and stand up to the government. Milton, are you there? Did we lose you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I went blank for a minute. Yeah, I'm here. So, you think they'll side with us? If things break out, they'll do the right thing and ignore an order?
Some will, some won't. I don't know about the police. Certainly when you look at the police, like the ones I was talking to before about where they literally groped this woman's private parts for 11 minutes and found nothing, they'll probably just do what they're told by their command authority. But I can imagine a lot of really good police officers would stand with the American people. And again, we have a neighbor that is very concerned about the direction the government is going with. As far as the military is concerned, I imagine the majority of the rank and file military will stand with the American people, because military people tend to be very strict constitutionalists. Has been my experience with them.
Okay. All right, that gave me a perspective of what to watch for, then. Thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Getting on back to the news. Let's talk about the war zones. There are so many wars all over the place. Over in Syria, the Syrian government is making tremendous gains. They're clearing central Syria from ISIS. And it's only a matter of time now before that war is over. And I'm sure the U.S. will claim victory, that they got ISIS and al-Qaeda, but we know that wasn't the real agenda. The real agenda was regime change, and the U.S. has lost this one. Now, there's still a possibility that they'll throw another false flag. Oh, my goodness, Assad is tap dancing barefoot on shag carpeting or some other atrocity, and they'll launch more cruise missiles. But it's going to be hard selling that to the American people, because we've been lied to so many times, and we know we've been lied to. Now, here's where it gets interesting. They're talking about this ceasefire deal regarding the southern part of Syria, and Israel is out there saying, well, you, the White House, Trump, you've got to make sure this deal is amended to make sure the Iranian forces are kicked out of Syria, and Hezbollah is kicked out of Syria, and the Shiite militias are kept out of Syria. And they're out there making all these demands, overlooking a very important point we need to keep in mind. Israel has no business in Syria. They're trying to steal the Golan, yes. But Israel has no legal justification for being in Syria. Neither does the United States. Iran was invited in by the government of Syria. Same with Russia, same with Hezbollah, same with all these other people. But Israel's out there saying, no, you got to make the peace deal serve our country. And they're putting pressure on the White House, forgetting the fact that the United States also does not have a legal basis to be in Syria. They were not invited by the Syrian government. They have not been given permission by the Syrian government. Technically, the U.S. has committed acts of war against Syria by flying into their country with warplanes and bombing food storage facilities, oil pipelines, water processing plants, and all that other stuff. But right now it's politically incorrect to call it a war. Well, for the people on the receiving end of all those bombs, the Syrian people, it sure looks like a war to them. Israel's dealing with another interesting crisis. Apparently, down at the Dimona nuclear reactor, which is Israel's primary bomb factory, the employees have gone on strike there because they have not had a pay raise over quite a time, and they're on strike, and Israel's government is now issuing emergency regulations saying you can't strike, you have to work at the money that we give you, and that is building up to a crisis, and basically they're being told you cannot go on strike here. And I would not be surprised if more photos of that bomb factory in the basement started leaking out on the internet. That would certainly be an appropriate response, I think. All right, back to the phones here. Don in Iowa, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, Mike, yeah. I've heard a lot of people, you and others, say that Soros is behind everything. But, everybody seems pretty convinced that he's funding the Antifa and all these other, and Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
Is this true?
He certainly seems to be the last one in the funding pipeline, but as that other caller indicated, we're now aware that Soros is getting U.S. government money that are basically donations of your tax dollars to his various non-governmental organizations. So basically they're using your money to fund these groups to cause acts of violence to change the political nature of our country. And again, under the USA Patriot Act, this is an act of terror.
According to this Millie Weaver, that's the reporter for Alex Jones, she was there in Charlottesville, and Antifa, these guys, they stand around and look stupid, but actually they're trained.
Yes.
They have coolers. They bring coolers that makes it look like they just got some, something to drink, but they have ice. They have all kinds of weapons in there. They have species. Yes. Old tampons and stuff like that to throw on people. They have chemical weapons. They have pepper spray, and they're trained. According to Alex Jones, they have camps where they train, they're trained, and they're probably paid too, right?
Yeah, $25 an hour. Somebody found the Craigslist ad. It's a company out of Los Angeles.
And this is all totally illegal for them to have a paramilitary organization like that. And she said they're trying
not if they're working for the U.S. government or the globalist agenda. It's only illegal.
So in other words, Trump himself doesn't really care. Trump was just basically full of bull when he went through everything, and all he wants to do is just act like he's president, and he doesn't care about anything, right?
Well, I think the reality is, and again, I've said this many times before, Trump was very naive coming into the White House. He thought it was going to run like a business by the same general rules, and it is a completely different environment. And he is totally surrounded by people who oppose him. He's controlled, and basically he is so busy trying to sort out the swamp and hang on to his job that he really can't do anything else right now. They've got him focused on the war agenda. That's exactly where they want him focused. And remember,
he's responsible for hiring the people that he got there. I mean, he's not totally stupid. He knew the McMaster. I mean, you can look up McMaster on Google or WikiLeaks or anything. You can see Wikipedia. It's no secret who these guys what they're all about. He knew who McMaster was.
Well, he was going on a lot of recommendations from people around him, but the reality that he's having to face is that everybody inside that beltway is corrupt, and they're all united against him. And what Trump should have done when he came into the White House was fire everybody.
So why did he hire him? Why did he hire him?
Don, let me get an idea out. Trump should have come into the White House on the first day of his presidency and fired everybody and hired people from outside the Beltway. There's a lot of qualified, skilled people out here in the country that can do the jobs that need to be done in the White House, but we don't have those compromising political connections. We're not being blackmailed. They don't have photos of us poking a badger with a spoon or whatever else is going to be used to try and control us. And that's Trump's biggest failing, is he came on in and he was going to be magnanimous in victory, and he kept the Obama holdovers, and he started accepting recommendations for hiring White House personnel who turned out to be very bad for him. And anybody who wasn't going along with the game was ejected, like Bannon. And he's totally tangled up in this bureaucratic duct tape, is basically, for lack of a better word. They've got him totally controlled. And so, he's... at the moment, he's an enfeebled king. He's an enfeebled king. He's a feebled king, like the Merovingians toward just before they were kicked out and the Carolingians took over. All right, Don, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go here, and we're going to do a quick shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Getting on back to the war zones. Over in Iraq, their army is now liberating the last major ISIS stronghold in Iraq. So that is all but over as well, which probably explains why the U.S. government is now announcing they're going to have a permanent military base in Iraq, and you shouldn't be upset about it. After all, we've got permanent military bases in Germany and Japan and France and all over the world, 800 bases all over the world. So one more, who's going to kick up a fuss about that? Now, turning to Iran, this situation is starting to get very, very ugly. President Rouhani, who has just been re-inaugurated as president of Iran, is out there saying if the U.S. continues their threats, Iran could walk away from the P5+1 deal and jumpstart their nuclear program again. And their rationale is very simple. The deal was Iran would suspend their nuclear program. They would allow other countries to refine the fuel rods for their nuclear power stations, and the U.S. would relax the sanctions on Iran. Iran has complied with all their terms, and once again, the IAEA has come on in and said, yes, Iran is playing by the rules. The United States has not. Many of those sanctions that were in place before the P5+1 deal was agreed to are still there, and now the U.S. is throwing more and more sanctions on top of Iran, supposedly over their missile program. And Iran has already gone to the United Nations to say this adding of sanctions clearly is a violation of the P5+1 deal. And it is. They're right about that. But at this point, the world is waking up to an ugly reality. It doesn't matter what deal you make with the U.S. government. If they want to invade you, they will invade you. This is just one example. Iran is playing by the rules. The U.S. government is not. Syria is another one. Bashar al-Assad surrendered all of his chemical weapons, which was supposedly the big deal between the U.S. government and Assad's government, and the U.S. government still went into Syria trying to overthrow Assad. The entire world is coming to understand you don't bother making a treaty with the United States, they will not keep it. It doesn't matter what you surrender. It doesn't matter what you give up. If the U.S. is coming for you, they're coming for you. And the smart thing to do is to get ready to basically make an invasion of your country as expensive as possible for the United States. And that's what's going on. So Iran's parliament has voted to increase the budget for their missile program and their elite military by $520 million. And yes, the U.S. is trying to find some reason they can go into Iran and say, well, yeah, they're playing by the rules on the P5+1, but we've got to go on in there. And over at the New York Slimes, they've got the start of a new propaganda campaign against Iran. Can anyone stop Iran from taking over Iraq? Ooh, Iran is coming to take over Iraq. They're claiming the Iranians are down in Venezuela now. And again, a reminder, Iran has not initiated a war of conquest against another country in over 200 years. In the Iran-Iraq war, it was Iraq who started hostilities at the behest of the U.S. government. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Tony in Puerto Rico, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hello, Mike.
Hi.
Listen, I was listening yesterday to Roger Stone, and he was talking about LBJ being the linchpin of Kennedy's assassination, and I kind of agree with him. But if you study the swearing in by LBJ on Air Force One, you notice that he doesn't show any remorse in his face or sorrow. That kind of makes him guilty. What do you think about that?
Well, there's another photo from that very same incident where he's being sworn in on Air Force One where one of his advisors in the background is winking at him.
Right.
Okay, now LBJ was involved. I don't know that he was the linchpin, but definitely the plotters of the assassination understood they had to court LBJ so that he would do what they wanted him to do, and basically terminate some of Kennedy's policies. But as of right now, it looks like the people behind the JFK assassination were the Texas oil billionaires who were being harmed by the oil depletion allowance issue, organized crime who felt that they had been double-crossed by Kennedy when he made Robert Kennedy his attorney general. You had the CIA, who felt John F. Kennedy had betrayed them at the Bay of Pigs. You had the Federal Reserve, who were outraged over Kennedy's signing of Executive Order 11110 and the issuance of the United States note. And you had Israel, that was very angry over John F. Kennedy's sincere desire that Israel not acquire nuclear weapons. And there may have been some other players in there, but those are pretty much the main ones. And so Kennedy is killed. Johnson comes on in. He ramps up the war in Vietnam to keep the defense contractors happy about that, and basically ended the U.S. note and turned a blind eye to the fact that Israel was even then stealing weapons-grade uranium from the United States for their first-generation nuclear weapons. So it's like I keep telling you, wars and assassinations never happen for just one reason. It is a confluence of various individuals and groups who have their own particular agenda, but those agendas all overlap in terms of the war or assassination being their best solution.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Now, interestingly enough, when President Rouhani was inaugurated last week, there was a huge crowd of European leaders, ministers, and dignitaries who showed up, which was effectively a snub to Washington, D.C. And it's an indication that Europe is starting to pull away from the U.S. government's influence, and they're starting to make their own friends over in the Middle East. So more and more, the world is waking up and realizing that for all this talk about Iraq is a rogue state, and Iran's a rogue state, and North Korea is a rogue state, and all the rest of it, it is the United States that's gone rogue. It's the United States that does not honor their treaty obligations. It is the United States that for the last 16 years has been invading and drone striking and torturing and regime changing all over the globe. And that is the reality, and the rest of the world is starting to stand up to it. And a good example would be over in Libya. One of their leaders, Haftar, is now traveling to Moscow and asking for military aid. Now, this guy used to work for the United States. He was part of the group that pulled Muammar Gaddafi out of power. And so all of a sudden, now he is pivoting towards Russia. And we're seeing that more and more in these countries that have been attacked and destroyed by the United States. The agenda obviously is when they rebuild, they'll borrow the money from American banks, they'll buy their cement and other supplies from U.S. companies. It'll be good for business. And now all of a sudden we're seeing these countries that have been close to destroyed by U.S. military action, and they're all taking their business elsewhere. And this is just another indicator. The American empire is clearly on the wane. Our challenge now is to prevent it from destroying the rest of the world as it flops about in its death throes on the world stage. And that's going to be a real trick when you consider just how crazy some of these people in government really are. We got to take a break for commercials. Back with a phone call after these few words. America, welcome back to our show here. And before we take this phone call, story just now hitting the news wires. Apparently up, this comes under the category of give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And apparently a bunch of social justice warriors, zealots, fanatics, whatever you want to call it, held a protest inside the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, demanding that the statue of President Theodore Roosevelt be taken down because, after all, he was a racist. And they're out there just... You're never going to make these people happy by giving in to them. No matter what you do to accommodate them, they'll say, oh, well, we want to do this and we want to do that. And they're talking about literally wanting to remove Teddy Roosevelt from Mount Rushmore because, after all, he was a racist. And this comes on the heels of earlier suggestions that the faces of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson be dynamited off of Mount Rushmore because they owned slaves, which means Mount Rushmore is going to be there just with Abraham Lincoln on there, the man who led us into the Civil War. By the way, somebody wrote in to remind me, Lincoln actually freed the slaves just 18 months into the Civil War. And the Civil War continued for another 2.5 years. It was all about the money, taxation. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Sheldon in Ohio, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, good afternoon. On Trump, with his mental capacity, and he said he was going to clear the swamp there, I flashed back immediately to 1987, the Untouchables, and one was Costner and Sean Connery.
Yeah, I remember that one. Sean Connery did a bang-up job on that one.
Yeah, they did, but they were just fighting and going, there's got to be a way. And then they'd been in court before, but finally when they were in the court, he just put on the brakes and he went and got this, what was it, a small claims judge or something, and they switched judges to one that wasn't on a take?
No, they swapped the juries. And they claimed to have evidence that the judge in the case was on the take, which they didn't, but they just took a guess and said, yeah, they're all dirty. And so they swapped the juries, and Capone went away for violations of the tax crimes. But, yeah, we're seeing... Go ahead.
I could just see Trump getting the whole army, the Joint Chiefs in there, sitting them all down, and they all think, oh, good, we're going to have pizza and beer. And he says, you're all fired. And then he brings in a whole bunch of ensigns from each branch, and you just pick up where you left off. It would have been great. It should have happened that way. Thanks for your time.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Here's a problem. Like attracts like, and that is that the people who are at the top of the military command, they're going to have several layers of subordinates under them that think exactly the same way. You're going to go along with the policies and philosophies of the boss because that's how you get promotion and advancement and more of those little ribbons to put on your dress uniform. And so getting rid of the Joint Chiefs and promoting the next layer up is not really going to work all that well. But again, the president is supposed to be the commander-in-chief of the military forces. Congress is trying to usurp that and say, we're going to decide where the country is going to war and not you. But at this point, again, and I know I've said this many times before, the only positive outcome I see in all of this is that the U.S. is going to have a Soviet Union-style collapse. collapsing economy might trigger it, or we just might start seeing people inside the government ratting each other out. At some point, it's going to break open, and they're going to start pointing fingers at each other, and then we're going to have to rebuild a whole new nation here. But I really do think it is going to happen, and we just have to wait it out. I am completely opposed to the idea of a civil war in this country or an armed rebellion, because the wrong people always get killed and crippled in those things. And at my age, I certainly am not going to be able to pick up a musket and join in the festivities, and so I'm not going to send other people out there to do something I can't do myself. So, be calm, have a beer, some pretzels, wait for the show. We'll be back with another phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go back to the phones here. Uma in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How you doing?
Doing fine.
That's good. Hey, I won't keep you long. Hey, I was just reading on Zero Hedge. The Charlottesville organizer, I guess he was actually an organizer for Occupy Wall Street, too. And
yes.
I guess he was an Obama supporter, too.
Yes.
But it's kind of weird now he's doing this organization for the alt-right, and it just looks like it is. They're just trying to, it's the biggest divide I've seen in my life.
Yes.
You know, I'm in Canada, and that's pretty scary what you guys are going through there in the States and stuff, but hopefully people can channel their energy into seeking the truth, and hopefully turn the energy around and get together and really go after the real people who are trying to divide them.
Yeah, absolutely, no question about that. And again, people need to go back and look at the history of COINTELPRO, because this is not the first time this government has done this kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, it's scary. But hopefully you guys can keep your heads up there. You know, Canada. I'm in Canada. You know, I'm praying for the states to pull through, and you know, everybody needs to stand together now, because we're going to be through some tough times, and that's North America all together too, right? So
yes.
Hopefully we can keep going, and hopefully we can get through these lies, I guess.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's lies. It's liberalism. It's globalism. I got to tell you, common sense right now seems to be an endangered species, and nobody's running a charity to try and save what little is left.
Oh, I know. You're getting drowned out for all these lies, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thanks for having me, Mike.
All right, well,
thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one.
All right, same to you. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Ken in Michigan. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Thanks for taking my call. You know, if Congress wanted to usurp the military from the president, well, that's kind of their job anyway, you know, to declare war on other countries. And, you know, that's fine. We're going to war over there. And then Donald Trump can just say, okay, we're on vacation.
Well, the way it was originally set on up, and we saw this throughout our entire history, is the president would go to Congress and ask for a declaration of war. In this case, we have something totally new, which is Congress deciding where the war is going to be. And that is a tremendous difference. I mean, following, for example, Pearl Harbor, we've all seen the film of Roosevelt, you know, just standing up there and asking Congress for a declaration of war, which they gave him. But here we have this idea where the president, as commander-in-chief of the military, may not want to go to war, and as long as Congress can come up with a veto-proof majority, they can vote this country into any war that they feel like doing, all for the sake of whatever defense contract or stocks they have in their portfolio. I mean, it's not going to cost them any money. They're going to make money off the war. It's not going to cost their families. Their families are safe. At home, it's your money is going to go. Your kids are going to get killed and crippled, and they don't care. It's, you know, the war is like a giant grinding machine, and they pour your children into the top of it, and out of the bottom of it comes stacks of money.
Well, yeah, I agree with that completely. But Congress can vote us into any war they want. It's just whether or not the president is going to say, "Fight." He can just tell them go over there and have a vacation.
Yeah, technically he could. As commander-in-chief of the military, he could order them to stand down, and Congress couldn't do a thing about it.
Bingo. So he's got them there.
Except that we have the military-industrial complex and those joint chiefs who are fully on board with Congress, to push this war agenda. And I think Trump has already been told that if he tries to stop the war machine, he will be impeached or 25th Amendmented out of the office, if not outright killed.
Yeah, that's very, very true.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And, at this particular point, Trump is completely corralled. They've got him completely under their control. However they're doing it, blackmail, threats to his family, who knows? And they may have just said, look, we're the deep state, we're the knockocracy, we're going to run the country, you just stand up there and look presidential, because if you do anything other than that, we're going to use the John F. Kennedy approach to your presidency. All right, the phone lines are empty. Getting on back to the news here. It looks like the beginnings of a destabilization operation against Russia. Now, not too long ago, Putin shut down all these George Soros non-governmental organizations inside Russia. And he did it because he discovered that they were, in fact, funneling money and other support to opposition groups, which is part of the standard destabilization plan. And he kicked them all out, such as like USAID was a big one, very, very dark reputation from those people. Well, apparently the FSB, which is doing a really good job, they've arrested 4 more ISIS militants planning terror attacks on Moscow. And the interesting thing is, they've arrested some Ukrainians as well, and they found 2 TNT bombs, a grenade, telephone saw, camera, and there was this Ukrainian saboteur, Gennady Lemshko, who has outright confessed that he was being trained in Ukraine to sneak into Russia to start causing unrest there as well. And apparently, he said that the training was coming from outsiders, non-Ukrainian. So we're looking at this article in Fort Russ saying that it is, ta-da, no surprise here, the CIA is recruiting and training these saboteurs to be sent into Crimea and Donbass. So they're still playing their same games that they've been playing all along, apparently unconcerned that the world is waking up to what's really going on out there. Now, as you know, the war of words over the diplomatic missions is continuing, and apparently the U.S. is threatening new additional steps against Russia's diplomatic missions, and Russia is saying that they will respond in kind. It's going to go on seizing more facilities, ejecting more diplomatic staff. Remember, this all started under Obama. They're trying to put the blame for the deteriorating relations with Russia onto Trump, but this all began under Obama here. Now, Crimea has done something very, very interesting on behalf of their people, and apparently they passed a bill that says the residents of the Republic of Crimea do not have to make payments on loans they took from Ukrainian banks. They're just going to write off the debts of their citizens, the same thing that Iceland did. And it is a reminder that a government that is really working to free its people from the slavery of the central bankers can simply write off the debt. Congress has the authority to shut down the Federal Reserve at any time. They can vote to rescind the charter. They won't, because the model is to keep you a debt slave to those bankers. It's a new feudalism, a new serfdom. That's what we're really living under here as well. Now, over in North Korea, both Koreas, China, and the U.S. are pulling back and saying, all right, let's back off here and start talking about what's going on here. And, of course, Kim Jong-un is saying the U.S. needs to show itself to be committed to an alternative to the conflict. In other words, stop having all these military exercises off their coast. Because that is what North Korea is responding to. South Korea has come on out with a very strong statement saying that only they can declare war on North Korea. And they're telling Donald Trump he's got no business being over there on their side of the world, threatening war against North Korea. Now, earlier today, there was a little bit of a shakeup. There was a 2.6 earthquake, which was initially reported as striking an area near Pyongyang. And, of course, the corporate media is out there saying, it was another nuclear test. It was another nuclear test. North Korea is in violation. The war is on. As it turns out, it really was an earthquake. And it was not near Pyongyang. It was actually out offshore and very deep underground, someplace where you can't get a nuclear bomb to test it. So it really was an earthquake, and everybody overreacted, as is usually the case. And by the way, I got to tell you, with all these talking heads on the corporate media, and they're all out there, war is good, war is great. I'd like to see them in those baggy BDUs carrying an M16 on the front line. Maybe they wouldn't be quite so enthusiastic about it if they're the ones having to dodge bullets and be careful they don't step on a landmine with those spiky high heels that they're wearing over there. Now, there's still a big tiff going on over North Korea's rapid development of missile technology. And there was an allegation that they'd gotten the technology from Ukraine. Ukraine is denying that they were selling rocket engines to North Korea and is now saying that the technology, the plans for the engines, were stolen by North Korean spies, who I imagine would probably stand out like a sore thumb there in the Ukraine, but that's entirely beside the point. But they did have 2 North Koreans that were arrested and convicted for espionage, and Ukraine is saying these were the ones who probably stole the plans. Now, experts are saying that really doesn't make that sense. Having the blueprints is one thing. Knowing how to turn those blueprints into an actual working rocket engine requires expertise by the people who normally make those. In other words, Ukrainian specialists. And so the allegations and charges are going back and forth and back and forth. And we know countries will sell weapons and weapon systems under the table when they're not supposed to. Remember when the former apartheid government of South Africa fell, documents surfaced showing that Israel was trying to sell them a nuclear weapon. The deal fell through. There's also evidence that the so-called Vela incident was a joint Israel-South African nuclear weapons test. As we found out from documents leaked out of the Obama administration. At the same time, the government was telling us ISIS and al-Qaeda were our dire enemies in the war on terror, the U.S. government was funding, training, and supporting them. It's a huge black market operation out there in weapons. Now, Mike Pence is down there in South America, and he's trying to push this idea that Venezuela is a threat to the U.S. Iran is in there, Hezbollah is in there, Russia's there. Oh, Venezuela is a major threat to the United States. Actually, the country is on the verge of collapse. They're not a threat to anything except their own population. The only way they're any kind of a threat to U.S. interests is to the oil companies. Because Venezuela's got a huge amount of oil, and they're selling it around the world for currencies other than the U.S. dollar. That's the only real threat. And that's why Venezuela is on the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list. Because if you go on back to that document that was leaked by General Wesley Clark, the plan for the United States was to conquer all the world's resource-rich areas, to force those resources to be bought and sold only with U.S. dollars, to keep up foreign demand for dollars and prop up the American economic system. Any country that's selling their oil or other resources for currencies other than the dollar is hence a threat to the U.S. economy. That's what led to the war in Iraq. In 2002, Saddam Hussein got permission from the United Nations to sell Iraq's oil for the euro instead of the dollar. 1 year later, screaming weapons of mass destruction, they invade Iraq, they kill Saddam Hussein, and Iraq's oil's back on the world market, only for the U.S. dollar. Same thing in Libya. Gaddafi was doing a good job. He was everybody's friend, and so forth. And all of a sudden, he throws out the private central bank of Libya, sets up a new state bank, and establishes a new value-based currency called the gold dinar, then announces that Libya's oil is for sale, but only for the gold dinar. Go on in, color revolution, Gaddafi gets brutalized and killed, the gold for the gold dinar vanishes, nobody knows where that went, and Libya's oil is back on the world market only for the U.S. dollar. You see how it all works and ties together? Now they're trying to get Venezuela in there as well. Any nation that has natural resources, such as North Korea, that sells those resources for currencies other than the dollar is a target for the U.S. government. So kiss your children goodbye. They're going to be killed and crippled in a noble cause propping up that particular piece of pretty printed paper. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Tom in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, hey, good day, Michael, to you. Yeah, Michael, you're right about that. Now, if Cuba had oil, you think the Castro brothers would have stayed there? If they would have had oil around Cuba, real good oil, like Venezuela?
Yeah. They actually do have a little. They actually do have a little oil, I think, off the eastern coast, and that's been a bone of contention. Same thing around Haiti. They're starting to realize there's a lot of oil in those subsea structures, along with a lot of methane hydrate, which is very dangerous to be playing around with.
That's right. They do have a lot of methane, I believe, off the coast of Haiti or something. I did hear that. But Michael, the reason I did call you, I want to ask you something. Yesterday I brought up the fact with this helicopter. They were trying to tie that in with this Klan rally and all this. That helicopter, you know what, Michael? Have you ever seen the movie The Kingman?
Oh, yeah.
I believe that was like a psyops, and they were trying to use electronic devices to get all these groups to clash with each other. That wouldn't surprise me if they're trying to do some kind of electronical impulse on the brains of these people. I mean, it's not far-fetched, and I believe that could actually happen. And their helicopter had a system fried because they were trying to do something they probably didn't know what to do, and it crashed, and now they were trying to tie it in. They had to try to cover that up with.
I'm in a place here where Occam's razor proves how useful it is, which is the simplest explanation is going to be the one that works. They hired these people to show up. The police shoved them together to get the violence going, and the helicopter crash was either mechanical failure or pilot error, and that's.
Michael.
Okay, so we're going to let you go here because we have.
Michael, one more thing. I said one more thing.
Tom, we got to take a break.
George
Tom.
Soros is paying
Okay, hang on a second. There we are. We got to drop Tom here because we have to take a break for commercials. And again, I'm asking the callers, keep it short. And don't get into this one more thing, or I've got a drop button, and I'm not afraid to use it. So behave yourselves. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Somebody just wrote on in. I think this was tongue-in-cheek. Shouldn't all memorials to Woodrow Wilson be removed and eliminated, such as the Wilson Graduate School? Everyone knows he was a racist against blacks. Actually, I'd be in favor of tearing down the Woodrow Wilson statues because he gave us the Federal Reserve. But I digress. We're going to go back to the telephones here. Paul in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. I'm going to tell you something. One of the reasons why whites might be drawn to white nationalism is because of diversity fatigue.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, because if diversity is not going to work out and be all that it was promised to be, and basically, particularly in Europe, you import or have hostile minorities that are constantly vexing and harassing and haranguing the whites. Of course, whites are going to want to go back into a period of time, and that's like alluding to Eric Hoffer's book, The True Believer, where you go back in time at a better time in life where you love the past and hate the present. So I think that it behooves the left. They got to watch out because by their behavior, I think they're going to be driving more people, either intentionally or unintentionally, towards white nationalism. Now, one other point I'd like to make, because I know you want to...
Before you go on to that point here, what I would like to suggest is we stop using the phrase white nationalism and just say nationalism, because there are people who've, their families have been in this country for generations, and they're not themselves white, but they are in love with this nation. and they are just as bothered by the illegal immigration and refugee problems as anybody else. So I want to ban the phrase white nationalism from this radio show and just say it's nationalism. It's Americans in love with their country. Because the media is using white nationalism to sort of recast this as a racial argument, and that's really not what it's about.
Right, but well, then let it apply for Europe then, because I do believe this. Can't there be like places in the world, like it's like this? I feel this about Japan. I wouldn't want to migrate to Japan because I'm not Japanese, and if I'm walking around in Japan all the time and living there, I would feel like I'm lessening Japan. None of their statues or their ancient texts have anybody like me in them or looking anything like me, right? So I dilute the meaning of Japan by being there. You're imposing yourself on them. And so I'm a person who, I have hatreds, I admit this, but I'm smart enough to know what I do when I hate a group of people or people, I just avoid them. And so that's why the onus of blame of what happened in Charlottesville can only go on the Antifa people. And we can see that after the riots, because notice Antifa right now is having a rally in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
I don't see any haters or white nationalists out there counter-demonstrating or trying to bring violence to them. Clearly, they intended to non-peacefully assemble in Charlottesville.
Oh, there's no question about it. They came prepared for a violent confrontation. And by the way, a follow-up on that story about Theodore Roosevelt's statue at the museum in New York. Apparently, they were going to try and tear it down, but the museum guards formed a phalanx around it and protected the statue. So, they believe in violence. Paul, thank you for the call. We're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And joining us on the telephone right now is Leon Siu, Foreign Minister for the Kingdom of Hawaii. And Leon, it's been way too long since we've had you on the show. Bring us up to date on what's going on with the sovereignty of the nation of Hawaii.
Yes, well, aloha, Michael. Good to be back again, and aloha to all your listeners. I am right now sitting in Honolulu, Hawaii, and I am about ready to embark on some new trips, but just to bring you up to date, some of you don't know, but the Hawaiian Kingdom is in the process of being restored as a sovereign nation, and we have been working on this project for quite a long time, but in recent years, and particularly in recent months, we've made quite a bit of progress. And so, so we are right now on the verge of, I've been operating as the Minister of Foreign Affairs, which means I've been interacting and keeping the foreign community abreast of what's going on. And it's been very, very encouraging because we're making a lot of progress, particularly at the UN as well as with individual countries that we're speaking to.
All right, well, let's do a pullback here for our listeners who may not understand what the issue is really all about. And it has to do with the manner by which Hawaii was acquired by the United States in violation not only of U.S. law but international treaties that were binding at the time, and basically led to the overthrow by threat of military force of the last Queen of Hawaii, Liliuokalani. And the imposition of a government that was fighting for annexation to the U.S. And amazingly enough, the people who were behind this, all they wanted to do was get rid of the sugar tariff because sugar was one of the major crops of Hawaii at the time. The United States was one of their biggest customers. And they figured, well, if we can overthrow the government and become part of the United States, we will not pay the tariff and we'll all become insanely rich. And all of this dates back to 1893. When all of this was taking place. And more recently, though, during the Clinton administration, Bill Clinton actually signed a public law, 103150, that acknowledged the illegality of the annexation and recognized that the Hawaiian people had never actually surrendered their sovereignty. And that, of course, is the foundation for the indigenous Hawaiians saying, we're still a nation, we're still a people.
Yes.
So, if you want to sort of start at that foundation and give us more recent history.
Sure, thank you very much. Now, that's a very, very nice backup. What we really realize, though, is, however, is this is not an indigenous issue. It's an issue of indigenous national sovereignty.
Yes.
And so, which means including the indigenous people, as well as those that were not indigenous but were nationals of the Hawaiian Kingdom.
Yes.
Anyway, so what we've been doing in the last few years is clarifying this, that this is not an indigenous movement per se, and it's also not a movement to start a new country or to secede from the U.S. It actually is a movement to restore that which already was, and technically, according to international law, continues to be, and that is the sovereign kingdom of the Hawaiian Islands. And so what we've been doing, of course, is trying to get over the misconceptions and the misdirection that had been deliberately placed in a way by the United States to make it appear as if there was a lawful acquisition, which there wasn't. There was no treaty of annexation or anything like that. So what we're doing right now, particularly in the mood of the international community over the last 60, 70 years of decolonization, although we're not using that process, but the international community is quite familiar now with the idea of a country that had been overrun by another, but that the original country still has the right to express its self-determination, which means it gets to choose whether or not it wants to be independent or whether it wants to be subjected to another country. And in 1959, the United States reported to the General Assembly of the United Nations that the Hawaiian people had voted to become subjected as a sub-state of the United States, it appeared to be that on the surface, but actually it was that did not occur because of inconsistencies and irregularities in the process of the vote. So in 1959, the United States claimed that Hawaii became a state of the United States, and the UN went along with that, as well as all the other countries. But what we're pointing out now is that was in error, and we are still here as a sovereign nation, and we are slowly building the populace or the body of citizens in the Hawaiian Kingdom. So that's what we're about doing right now. We're moving this on two fronts. One, on the international level, to clarify what our status actually is, and secondly, on the local level, to raise up the nation. And we're actually succeeding quite well in both of those, to the point where I believe there's going to be some kind of a major breakthrough within the next couple of years, as far as a breakthrough, meaning the U.S. acknowledging that they are here unlawfully and that we need to begin a transition period to remove the U.S. and its toys, and particularly its war machine, out of the Hawaiian Kingdom.
Well, certainly, and first of all, I want to apologize for saying it was an indigenous issue, because you're right, it isn't. And when the sovereignty and independence of the Kingdom of Hawaii is recognized, I mean, Claire and I, certainly, if we're still here, we'd love to be citizens of the Kingdom of Hawaii. But obviously, we're seeing a period of intense U.S. militarism, but we're also seeing the potential for a major upheaval on the mainland, which might make things easier for that breakthrough moment that you're talking about. Now, as we see the globalists keep trying to bring us all under a one-world government, we're starting to see nations around the world really dig in their heels and push back with an intense nationalist fervor. We're hearing about the Calexit movement in California. Yes. We're seeing the European Union looks like they're about to break apart. Catalonia wants to break away from Spain. Crimea, of course, broke away from Ukraine. The Russians did not steal it. That's being the big lie there. So obviously, I'm sure that you're looking at all of this information. And before I ask you to give us your analysis about that, I want to share a little bit about you with our listeners that I did not get to at the introduction. Leon Siu has actually been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. And you actually did win the Sergio de Mello Peace Award from Brazil. I believe that's That's
yes,
your bona fides.
Yes, yes, and that's for work that I've been doing. Actually, not just with Hawaii, but with other places like West Papua.
Yes.
And basically, we share the same objectives, and that is for individual countries to be able to assert who they are and to form their own government and act in an independent way from the colonial or administrative powers that they had been under. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
well,
yes.
I was going to say, obviously there are a lot of vested interests who do not want to see this go forward. There's been a lot of unjustified fear-mongering going on that if the sovereignty of the Kingdom of Hawaii is restored, that all non-Hawaiians are going to get kicked out. This is absolute nonsense, of course. The reality is, as we saw in Crimea, they're going to change the flags and a few other things, and life will go on as it did before. When I was first talking about this issue at my website and radio show years ago, I was getting all these emails saying, well, how's the Kingdom of Hawaii going to compensate the United States for all these military facilities that were built all over the island? And, of course, my answer is, well, the United States did not build those facilities for the benefit of Hawaii. They built them for the benefit of the United States. And if a burglar steals your car, and while he's got it, he installs a new stereo system, then he gets caught and arrested and sent to jail, are you obligated to compensate the car thief for the stereo? And the answer, of course not. It's just something that's going to be there. But there is a lively debate about this. Again, it all comes down to the morality of nations. And it's very easy to take a moral stand when it goes in your favor. But your true measure of whether you are a person of principles is when the morality goes against you. And in this case, obviously, if we recognize the moral crime committed by the government of the United States of America and these plantation owners, you have to realize that, yes, Hawaii is a sovereign nation with its own rights, and the United States is occupying it.
Yes, and that's as simply put as possible. And the solutions are actually quite simple as well, because when you mentioned the changing of the flag and things like that, when the U.S. took over, or let's say when the revolutionists took over, or the people over to our queen took over, they maintained everything in place. All of the Hawaiian Kingdom structures and mechanisms and infrastructure were all still in place, and they just changed it over to a different management, so to speak. And then when they changed it into a Republic of Hawaii, which lasted a few years, that was still the Hawaiian Kingdom being operated by the Republic of Hawaii. And then when the U.S. So-called annexed Hawaii, which they didn't, but they called it that, 1898, again, it was still the Hawaiian Kingdom that was the structure or the infrastructure as well as the character was still the Hawaiian Kingdom. In fact, they maintained the flag of the Hawaiian Kingdom all through this, and today they call it the state flag, but it's still the Hawaiian Kingdom flag. And they maintain the motto as well as the state anthem or the national anthem of the Hawaiian Kingdom. But most of all, they maintained all the laws of the Hawaiian Kingdom and carried them forward and then made changes along the way to suit the American system. But everything is based on the Hawaiian Kingdom and the groundwork that was all laid by the Hawaiian Kingdom. So we actually have a very short distance to go to flip things over. Basically, I look at it as a change of management.
Yeah,
like a takeover from one management to another. And you can change it over. And then, of course, then the management philosophy sets in as a different philosophy of managing, but it's still the same country, it's still the same resources and the same people.
Well, one of the other counter arguments I've always heard is, oh, well, you're going to go back to being a kingdom. I mean, aren't kings kind of out of place? And, we've got to be a democracy. And most people don't understand Hawaii's last two kings were elected to that office. And it weren't hereditary. It's not like Kim Jong-un, and I wish he would shut up his mouth and everything. No, Hawaii's last two kings were elected to that office. They had to campaign. They went out the railroads around there. One of the cars that they campaigned on is still out there at the Railway Museum. And Hawaii was actually very advanced at the time. If you ever get out here, and obviously I'm going to recommend that you come on out here, if you ever visit Iolani Palace, it had working electricity and telephones before the White House did. So
and indoor plumbing.
And indoor plumbing, and the Hawaiian royal family was very close with British royalty, and it was seen as a modern civilized nation at the time that the Queen was overthrown.
Yes. And in fact, those that overthrew the kingdom had to go to great ends to try to convince others that we were a backward, savage country.
Yes.
But anyway, yes, we were a very advanced, progressive nation, and in fact, not only progressive in the advancements like indoor plumbing or electricity, but also in the area of diplomatic relations with other nations. So Hawaii was actually observed or seen as an equal to any other country like Great Britain and France, and they acknowledged that.
Yes.
And of course that's where our monarchies were strong, because at that time all of Europe was monarchical, and King Kalakaua as well as Kamehameha V both really extended and created a relationship with these countries through the monarchies. And by the way, many of the European nations still are monarchies.
Yes.
You look at the Netherlands, and look at the Dutch. The Netherlands, but also at Norway and Sweden and the Danes. So they're all still kings. But of course, the United Kingdom, one of the most obvious. So having a monarchy does not preclude being a modern state.
Absolutely. Okay, well, is there anything else you want to share with our listeners today? I mean, I'd love to keep you here for the entire hour, but I know you've got to get on out and go out and minister foreigns or something. And but again, before I let you go, Claire and I would very much like to see you in person again and just catch up on what's going on. This issue of sovereignty is something that we touch on regularly on my radio show and on the website. We're huge supporters. We'd like to see it happen again, because it's a chance to right an historic wrong.
That's correct. And we'd like to see it happen also, not only for ourselves, but because we feel Hawaii and the message that Hawaii has, which is aloha, is vital to the world today. We think we can contribute as a nation to the rest of the world, and be able to really speak into the vision of where the world is going in the future. There was a voyage that just recently ended of Hokulea, around the world voyage, and this is taking an ancient technology and ancient systems and putting it to use to travel around the world. But what was more important was the message, which was of peace and of taking care of our planet. Very basic message that spoke to many people. And this voyage was just an amazing thing, and just ended about a month ago.
Yes.
At Magic Island, with this huge reception of Hawaiians, as well as everybody else, and the world was looking in. So we're looking at the ability that Hawaii has really to impact the world. We have great favor in the eyes of the world, despite the fact that people think that we're part of the United States. They actually don't register us as U.S. Citizens, or as being an actual U.S. They see us as a separate nation, and as one that has a very desirable, not just desirable climate, but a desirable demeanor, and people really respond to that. So this spirit of aloha and all that the world actually needs now, particularly to confront some of the big problems that are facing the world.
Yes.
And speaking of which, so one of the areas that I'm working feverishly on and have been for the last 6 months, is this issue of North Korea and what's going on with that.
Okay.
So what we're trying to do is to interject. The Hawaiian Kingdom is trying to interject into the discussion and saying, we're looking at this wrong. We should be looking at the issues of peace rather than how do we stop wars. We should be looking at promoting how do we make friends and get along and the things that we have in common and the things that we can lift each other up on. So we are embarking on a peace initiative regarding not just North Korea, but for all these issues that are going on, but North Korea being the most immediate concern right now. And particularly since it concerns us here in Hawaii because inadvertently or purposefully, however you look at it, the United States military presence has made Hawaii into a large target.
Yes.
And almost like unavoidable target for any country that gets into conflict with the United States. And, right now they're talking about North Korea, but, the same concern existed with Russia and with China during the Cold War. We were seen as the Russians had missiles pointed toward us. The Chinese had missiles pointed toward us.
And they got big warheads on those. Leon, I'm sorry to do this. We have to take a 3-minute break for commercials. We'll come right back to you, and I want to hear more about what you're up to these days. We'll be right back.
Okay, very good.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And for our affiliates who are just now rejoining our show, we are talking with Leon Siu, the Foreign Minister of the Kingdom of Hawaii, talking about the restoration of Hawaii's sovereignty, which has never ceased existing, and even the U.S. government admits that Hawaii never ceased to be a sovereign, independent nation, and Leon is busy going around the world trying to get other countries to recognize this fact, and slowly there's a change in the view of Hawaii by the rest of the world. So you were talking about this peace plan of trying to find out, to change the paradigm. Instead of how do we avoid war, how do we find peace? And I think for most ordinary people, left to themselves, are going to be peaceful. And what we see is wars that are generated by a very, very few people. Just like the plantation owners who overthrew the government of Hawaii, it was a very small number of people compared to the whole population. But they wanted to change the government for their own personal ends, and they did use the threat of military force to accomplish it. So as long as war is profitable to certain individuals, I think we're going to have a hard time being rid of it. But every voice that's out there for peace is obviously going to be helping our cause. So this is a very short segment. We only have a couple of minutes before the next commercial break. It's very lopsided here. Right. What else have you been doing?
Well, actually, we're thinking much more about how do we present ourselves to the world, that we are a friendly and an open country, etc. And one of the things that we're working on right now is to get an Olympic committee going to become registered as a participant in the Olympics.
Oh,
just
boy!
Something very simple.
That would be.
And actually, it's going
bring back the memories of Duke. I'm always messing up his last name. Kahanamoku. And little trivia on the side, when I was working on Lost, we actually got to meet Rabbit. He came up and visited our set just shortly before he passed away. So that was kind of cool. But I think we should have an Olympic team. We've had Olympic gold winning athletes come from Hawaii.
Many of them.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. About 30 of them that I can count. And of course, in the 2020 Olympics coming up in Tokyo, surfing is being introduced as a sport. And so it's a natural time for us to just jump in there and say, this is our sport. And so here we are as a country to participate in the Olympic Games. So we're working on that, and it's looking good. It's looking very good that we'll be able to do that. And again, it's not a political statement, but one of a statement that this nation does exist, and we're here, and we're friendly, and we want to participate with the rest of the world in world events. So that's one of the other things. But there are quite a few other layers going on, and some of the work that I'm doing requires me to travel quite intensively. So during the month of September, I'll be gone the entire month on the road at various places like Geneva and New York, and actually even Seoul, Korea, in pursuit of just promoting as well as participating in world peacemaking and in telling people our story. So
okay.
I appreciate your interest, and I appreciate and I do think we need to get together. So let's try to make that happen.
All right. What is your website where people can get more information?
Okay. The best website is Hawaiian Kingdom, one word, .net.
All right. Well, I'm certainly going to post a link to that from What Really Happened. And is there another one you said?
Okay, very good. Well, there is another one called HawaiianKingdom.org.
Okay.
O-R-G, which is another person's website, but he also is posting quite a few articles there that are very, very helpful in describing our situation and describing some of the progress being made.
Okay, well, we're coming up on one more commercial break. It's going to be 4 minutes long, and then when we come on back, anything that you want to say to wrap up with our listeners, the microphone is yours for as long as you want it. And so,
all right, thank you.
Yeah, this is an important issue. And again, at the bottom this is an opportunity to right a great historical wrong committed by the government of the United States. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're still talking with Leon Siu, the Foreign Minister for the Kingdom of Hawaii, and I did put up links to those other two websites for the Kingdom of Hawaii, along with my own article on the history of Hawaii's annexation. And Leon, before I let you take the microphone back, there is a lot of public interest in this. And just the other day, there was a new YouTube video. I mean, we all know about the Hawaii's Last Queen, and these other documentaries have been done. But somebody actually did a video, Honest Government Advert, Visit Hawaii. It's very, very funny. I'm going to email you the URL. But it only came out like a month or so ago, 2 months ago. So there is current interest and awareness of what's going on over there. So, Leon, you can take the microphone and just say what you want to say to our listeners for as long as you want to, okay?
Okay. By the way, I love that video. I picked up on it the first day it came out.
Okay.
And it was great. Yeah, and where I've been encouraging some of our people, let's put up more videos like that.
Yes.
That particular one was done in Australia. And but we need to just continue to do that, which brings us to a very good point. One of the areas that we have identified where we really need to become much more involved in is in the media.
Yes.
And in reaching out to more people and telling them about our situation, not just telling them, but just conveying to them in very, many different ways. So the people are thinking in terms of, lectures, like university type lectures or TED Talks and things like that. But I think that short videos, like the one that was put up by that organization, is the key in that we just start to engage people with the idea that Hawaii is still a sovereign nation. We don't have to instruct them or do everything. They can go to websites for that. But just to start the discussion going and just to get their interest piqued.
Yes.
And we're finding that short things like that really are the answers, particularly as we're trying to reach out globally. And then there are, of course, some emergencies and crises like Mauna Kea. When that happened, the biggest, that also got quite a bit of coverage on social media, or actually it spread through social media. So when the two guys are notified that there was some activity going on, the trucks were moving up to the top of the mountain to build this telescope. They took off and they went up there. They got up to before the trucks did. And by the end of the day, there were hundreds of people up there because these guys were tweeting and they were Facebooking their friends and saying, look, we're trying to block this right now. So, and after 2 months, there still were thousands of people who were involved and many people connected all over the world. So we have the opportunity here to spread our message, that's one of the greatest things about that is that the world was able to see a protest that was peaceful and was very, very respectful of both sides. When the Department of Land and Natural Resources police force came to arrest them, they sat and they talked, or they stood and they talked, and they shared genealogies, they shared where they came from, and then at the end they said, okay, you have to do your job, we have to do our job, we understand that, this will all work out peacefully, and that's what happened. So I think that this was a great witness of how what could have been a terrible confrontation turned out to be something that was a peaceful ways to approach a problem, even though the problem has not been solved, but the idea is that we're still going to handle this like family and like, this kind of dispute that we do not have to go to war over. And so, so we are working on this particular thing right now. But as far as the media is concerned, I appreciate the kind of coverage we're getting from you, as well as some of the other people who are out there on the airwaves. And also we're trying to be much more responsible to continue our presence in social media.
Well, you're absolutely right. Social media is going to drive this, and I'm going to have an offline discussion with you about that very topic, because obviously that's an area in which I have some experience and resources that we could bring to bear on that.
Yes, great.
Okay, well, anything else, or should we let you go and go on out and shake the planet?
Yes. Well, one of the things that we're working on is there is a more serious part of this, which is the work that I'm doing with the United Nations or at the United Nations, and we've been attending or participating at the United Nations functions for about 40 years now, and slowly establishing our voice there. To the point where now people are listening, particularly since over the years what we've been telling them has played out to be true, and so our credibility has risen quite a bit, and the U.S.'s credibility has lowered quite a bit.
Yes.
So the two of these things working together are actually benefiting our position, and so we are on the verge of having the United Nations actually start to review what the U.S. has done with regard to Hawaii, and to weigh in. So the United Nations as a body doesn't really do this yet. It has to be initiated by countries, states, and so we have been successful in finding some of the states to actually start the ball rolling on these for us. So this September will be a major milestone. We've had several breakthroughs in the past, but this September we actually hope to have in the UN a measure that they will begin an investigation on what happened in Hawaii. So what really happened? That's what we're looking for.
Cheap plug. Okay. Well, Leon, thank you for bringing us all up to date. You're doing absolutely amazing work. You deserve that Peace Award. You should have won the Nobel Peace Prize. Not that it's really that respected anymore after Al Gore got done with it, but still, it's nice to have that recognition and that street cred, as it were. So keep me informed about what's going on, and any time that you can get back on the radio show, we'd be happy to have you.
Thank you. Mahalo.
Mahalo.
And get back in touch with me about getting together with you and your wife.
Absolutely. We'll do that one offline here. Thanks an awful lot. Okay.
All right.
That has been Leon. Aloha. That's been Leon Siu. He is the foreign minister for the Kingdom of Hawaii, and basically is traveling around the world to all these other countries, building the case, building the awareness that the Kingdom of Hawaii never ceased existence. That when the plantation owners gave Hawaii to the United States, it wasn't theirs to give. The annexation by the United States and the ouster of Liliuokalani were illegal under both American law and international law, because remember, war had already broken out between the U.S. and Spain, and so the Hague Treaty applied regarding neutral states occupied by military forces. So anyway, we're going to let Leon go and do his good work, and we're going to have him back here again very soon, because it's a very, very important issue. One more thing I want to follow up on. When he's talking about the protest up on by the observatories on the Big Island, and obviously I'm in favor of building the telescope there because it will be a crown jewel and among all those wonderful observatories that are up there. But he's absolutely right. Here in Hawaii, we don't see the kind of confrontations like you see in Charlottesville. And over the years, I have gone down with a camcorder and shot the protest marches for the war in Iraq and various other issues. Everybody always gets along, even when they disagree. It's all still, ohana out there. And that is one of the reasons why we are so different from the American mainland. All right, I understand we have a caller waiting on the line, Panfilo. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, from Houston. What is on your mind today?
Well, you're speaking of empire right now.
Yes.
Which is basically, where all our money is going to. The strength is basically, most of our strength is overseas. Our money is being spent overseas, and here at home, Homeland Security is prosecuting, patriots, Tea Parties, and any dissenting voice.
Yes.
And worst of all, the NDAA, which has shredded our constitutional, laws by using military spending, as an authorization to be able to pass it. There's just so much that's happening that I'm observing. And I've taken a few steps to try to do things on the local level, but it is an enormous task.
Yeah, but there's so many millions of Americans out there who are realizing something's gone horribly wrong with this country. And again, all we have to do is sit down, pull back, refuse to fill out the paperwork, refuse to just de-link from all of it. And it is actually very fragile, in part because of the economic weaknesses and the fact that so much of our wealth has been spent in foreign countries on all these wars. And when you go back and you study the history of the collapse of the former Soviet Union, you see that was a major factor. The Soviet Union overspent itself on the military, didn't have enough wealth left over to take care of their country, and that was one of the things that led to their collapse. And the U.S. government is on that same self-destructive path.
Yeah, you're right. But the only thing I can see that's really worse is like the use of the NDAA to down in 2012. The NDAA in 2012 authorized them to basically kill Americans even on American soil. They started off by assassinating that family up in Yemen, but I truly believe they proceeded in doing everything over here, including maybe even Seth Rich. That's what I believe.
I'm in agreement. The suicide story just doesn't wash. He's still, the botched robbery story just doesn't wash. He still had his wallet, his cell phone, and all of that other stuff here. But we had that situation up by the wildlife refuge where the FBI just gunned down an American citizen. And they tried to sell it saying, oh, he was a threat, he was this, he was that, and all the witnesses are saying no. As he stepped out of the car, he was shot from a distance with a rifle. So anyway, all right, I'm going to let you go here because we're running out of time and we've got callers, and I still have got a ton of news to get through here. So we're going to switch over here to Brandon in San Francisco. Brandon, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Just calling in regards to this divide and conquer agenda. The way the local news here is portraying that incident in Charlottesville, and what they're doing now is they're actually promoting the next gathering of so-called alt-right or white power, whatever they're labeling Trump supporters now. They literally are telling the locations and the dates and times. There's several coming up next week, and it's just truly they're promoting it like a rock concert here under the guise of, ooh, be careful, blah, blah, blah. It's just funny that the full agenda is coming together. And I simply want to say that the only thing I think to do to combat this is to find common ground with people that are brainwashed and controlled through the mainstream media. Because I think we're all anti-war, we're all anti-wasting our tax dollars, and I want to encourage people of color or marginalized, so-called marginalized folks to speak out if they support Trump or we do have common ground, because that's the only thing I believe that can combat this well-orchestrated divide and conquer strategy, common ground. And I think we have a bunch of common ground.
Yeah,
so
but
that's it,
again,
Mike.
the issue is that these people who are showing up to these rallies and committing the acts of violence are being paid to do that. This is a job for them. And if ordinary citizens sit at home, they'll just hire more people to get it on camera. And if they're really pushing it that hard, it looks like they may be trying to lay the groundwork for some kind of nationwide race riot leading to a declaration of a national emergency and suspension of the Constitution. And then the party will really be all over. And they've been trying to do this in the past, but it looks like this time they're definitely putting this on afterburner.
Right. You know, what's funny is all the war that we've been in, they've never once promoted an anti-war rally, and that speaks volumes to me. You know, you'd hear about something and you'd go, gee, how did I miss that? It's right up my alley. I want to protest these illegal wars. So on the flip side now, they're promoting their, you know, go down there and beat up a Trump supporter or whatever you want to call it. Hey, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. I remember, and again, this goes back to when the war in Iraq was just cranking up, and I was out there making videos of the anti-war protest, and a truck pulls up from the local NBC affiliate, and they get out. They walk right through the anti-war demonstration without even slowing down to go over and shoot video of the pro-war rally that was being sponsored by Clear Channel, and they were giving out free hot dogs and soft drinks and, you know, all the rest of it. And then these NBC people just, you know, closed up their cameras, turned around, walked right through us again without stopping, got in their van and left. So, yeah, it's all being engineered. All right, Alex in San Antonio, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I think you just touched on the aspect that I wanted to touch upon, which was if you go back and you analyze the WikiLeaks Clinton emails and the strategies that the DNC had, infiltrating the conservative movement was part of what was in their agenda. So as to create the environment that you just mentioned, so that FEMA could come out and take over the continuity of government after 5 or 6 cities are enthralled in violent protests. And I find it funny how no one is making mention of this, even though it was clearly delineated in their game plan for how they were going to deal with the conservative movement, or specifically the what they're denominating the alt-right, which is basically just people who are sick and tired of being lied to.
Yeah, it is a very real possibility. And right now, as I look at, I'm getting all these reports where they're literally promoting and selling more of these rallies to tear down statues and the rest of it. They're selling a violent confrontation on the streets of American cities, and it does look like they're trying to set the stage to have a declaration of a national emergency and martial law, and suspend what remains of our constitutional rights. And I hate to be a doomsayer, but I can't think of another reason for them to be doing what they're doing right now.
Well, we know that they were, ever since Hillary got caught saying that they were going to be hanging from nooses, we can pretty much figure out that the rats in Congress, they're all in cahoots to get this going so that they don't pay the ultimate price, which is going to jail.
I agree with you on that one. Alex, we're going to have to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program today after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and don't bother calling in because we're going to close the phone lines. We're going to take one more phone call from Kathy in Missouri. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I just wanted to mention that they don't have to pay anyone to do anything today. I'm not saying they weren't paid, but when I had a landlord up in Massachusetts, he told me one day, he said, "You know what? You're too good. You're like a goody two-shoes." He said, "We got rid of the good people like you in this town a long time ago, and I know firsthand because I was part of it." He said, "You got to get out of here." He said, "You're too good. You're too ethical." And then, just stuff like that. And basically, he said,
what you're talking about there.
Just let me finish my point. Just let me finish it. He said you could get somebody murdered for less than a carton of cigarettes 10 years ago. All right, so in my social work, I found that I knew the director of one of the largest homeless shelters in Massachusetts, And he said, we can't keep the predators from, they can give them a bottle of whiskey or nothing, just the power to have, some kind of important feeling role. They could get these vulnerable people to do just about anything for nothing. So that's my personal experience, and I just wanted to add it to the discussion.
Okay, well, there's always going to be a category of people, Stalin used to call them the useful idiots, who can be riled up around a slogan and go on out and do the dirty work, and they're not really thinking in depth about what it is they're doing. It's like all these people who are out here hacking the servers of the independent media, and they think it's cool and it's fun, and they're a spy, and they go to bed at night watching old James Bond movies and abusing themselves, and they don't really think about just how serious all of this is, because it isn't a game. They're messing around with our country. Anyway, Kathy, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go, and I'm going to try and get some news in here before the end of the program. Apparently, scientists have discovered a previously unknown field of volcanoes under the Arctic ice, a total of 91. Remember what I used to say, until they know how many volcanoes and thermal vents are on the floor of the ocean, they can't make any statements about humans warming the ocean. 91 volcanoes, that's a lot of volcanoes. They're not all active, but some of them are. And that's where you're getting the warming of the ocean. But the reality is that global temperatures are now cooler than when Al Gore won that Nobel Prize for the global warming PowerPoint presentation. And we've got the media is out here talking about all these heat waves, and they don't talk about places that are already seeing snow and ice. And once again, we have a publicity seeker, a guy by the name of Penn Haddow. He's a British explorer, and he and his crew have set sail in a sailboat from Alaska, and their goal is to be the first people ever to sail all the way to the North Pole, to prove the Arctic ice has melted. Well, if it has, it's probably those 91 volcanoes. But remember the last two times people tried to do these stunts and they got locked in the ice? I mean, we're basically coming up on the autumn. It's already starting to cool out there. Meanwhile, out in California, the U.S. Geological Survey is warning there are 8 volcanoes in that state that need to have a little more careful surveillance, observation, because they could start erupting at any time. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. I got to go do Jim Goddard's show up in Vancouver. We'll be back here tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Please stay tuned for John Stadmiller's program. There's going to be a lot of interesting things talked about there. Take what you learn here from the radio show and the website, share them with everybody that you know. We have to continue this pushback in these very dark and dangerous times against a government that has clearly gone off the rails. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.